Today's presenter, Russell Jackman, is a graduate of the McGeorge School of Law, University of Pacific, and was admitted to the State Bar of California in June of 1994. He has been vice chair of the California State Bar's Law Practice Management and Technology Committee and a member since 1996. He works specifically with law offices and attorneys that need to get the most out of their legal technology and creates PowerPoint presentations for opening statements, direct examinations, and closing statements to be used in court, and can work with attorneys directly to filter their documents and images so that they have the most powerful visual presentations possible. He also works with law offices and solo attorneys to upgrade their older systems to new ones, troubleshooting existing setups, and training attorneys and staff on Microsoft programs. He is available for remote access consulting on technology-related issues, so please feel free to contact him at any time.
Hello, thank you everyone for attending today's talk. This is outside tech coming into your law office. And at the time that we're speaking, actually, we are going through, this is in 2020, we're dealing with a current lockdown with the coronavirus. So this is now more topical than ever because people will be using their technology more now to cope with things dealing with their law offices, and remote computing is the way of the world at the moment. So it's kind of interesting to give this talk today when it's maybe more important than ever that people understand how to handle the influx of technology being used towards their law office, how that's going to change law office management in general. My name is Russell Jackman, and I'm with Computer Consulting Services. I've been providing legal technology help for attorneys and law offices in the Northern California area for about 20 years. And this is a talk that I've been giving for a little while because it continues to gain momentum. But a lot of as more and more people are bringing their technology to their law offices, and yet a lot of the questions stay the same even as the years go by. So it's interesting to revisit this. There have been some new challenges, so we're going to cover them today, including the challenges of the GDPR and California Privacy Act as how they influence taking tech to your law office from the outside. So let's start a discussion. So why bring your own tech? That's what we're going to be discussing at this point. And it's important to ask that question because that's a lot of law firms want to know why they would be interested in having the employees bring their own technology to their firm. And one of the main reasons is that it overall lowers IT costs. You have to spend less money on having to supply the technology to your employees. You don't have to do a rollout and worry about how that technology is going to be implemented, in the sense that like when I worked at a larger firm, they wanted to get BlackBerries for everyone. And so they had to go out and get a contract to first buy the BlackBerries, and to distribute the BlackBerries, to train everyone on the BlackBerries, and to configure the BlackBerries up, and to make sure that everyone was holding on to the BlackBerries and they get lost or they get stolen, that sort of thing. That's all on the responsibility and the shoulders of the firm. Whereas if you have people bring their own technology, then that's a cost up front you don't have to pay for. And you usually don't have to pay for things like the cellular service or the data plan, because the employees, the attorneys themselves, and the workers will be supplying their own plan, or perhaps you can get one bulk plan for the office, but you don't have to go out and get individual plans for that means that there's less training needed. As I pointed out, a significant amount of time was spent on when I was at the larger firm with the rollout period. First of all, just finding a time when it was appropriate to roll out a new piece of technology and to take the old technology back and then to put the new technology in place, make sure that everyone got it in time. It was always hard to get enough of the technology that we needed so that everyone would get it all at once. And so usually some people would get the technology upgrades first, and then others would get it later. And that actually would turn into some political arguments, people saying, the folks that were favored or the people that were, on the good side of things, they would get the technology handed to them first, whereas people who are on the lower echelon get it later and they take it personally, and that was a problem. The employee familiarity with the devices that they choose and they bring in is obviously much better than what you would have if you just roll everything out in a one-size-fits-all approach. The employees obviously are purchasing systems that meet their needs and that work for them. And so you don't get you don't get any complaints about the screen size isn't big enough, or the keyboard isn't the kind they like, or they don't like the color of the case or anything like that. People will have the systems that they want when they bring it in from the outside. And because they already own this technology, they are responsible for things like the warranty on it and the performance of it. They get the type of computer that they want that has the speed on it, hard drive space, peripheral connectivity that they're used to. So that is obviously a thing that you won't always get when you buy stuff as the firm and supply it to different employees. And then upgrades are usually left to the employee. So making sure that there's enough memory in it, that the system files are kept up to date, and that that the latest operating system is on there. That's all left up to the employee for the most part, and that does save on IT involvement in having to babysit every single system and make sure that it's all up to date. You just say the employees are responsible for that, and the firm is not, and that can at least initially take some of the burden off the firm. But we'll talk later about how maybe that's not always the case. And finally, the overall convenience of 24/7 access to have with those without needing multiple devices. So in other words, the employee has their own technology. They'll have it with them 24/7. They don't have to go back to the office, or they forgot something that was only on the office laptop, or only on the office cell phone, or only on the office tablet. And if they misplace it or they don't know where it is, then they lose access to it, then they're locked out. If they have their own technology with them and it's loaded on their devices, then there's probably a larger chance that they'll be taking better care of it and keeping better track of it than when it's something that belongs to the office. Stuff that belongs to the office often gets lost or stolen or broken much faster than the things that people, not always, but it's a usual thing. That, at least again, my experience working with the big firms, seeing how like the Blackberries got treated and the office laptops got treated versus the things that people own for themselves, much greater discrepancy, and usually much better sense of quality control over it when it's something that the people actually own. So we are talking about the challenges of what comes from bringing tech from the outside to the office. And probably the most obvious one that first comes to mind would be security. because when you leave that up to the individual, it's not as uniform as when you have something that you are in complete control of. As soon as something comes from outside the office, you're never quite sure what it brings in. Somewhat like, you know, what we're dealing with now with the coronavirus is that if you don't know where somebody has been as they come in from the outside, unless you disinfect it yourself and make sure it passes all tests, you're not sure that it couldn't possibly infect your network. And so that sort of understanding about security and being able to control the security of outside devices is probably the greatest challenge that people will get when they're bringing stuff in from the outside. And of course, the ability to control the devices when they take that information that was from the law, bring it to the outside. Because obviously, when it's somebody else's personal technology, you don't have the ability to control it once it leaves the office. And so that's a really big question for a lot of law offices is, can they trust the information that's on these individual computers, laptops, phones, tablets to be safe when they leave the office? Talk about some of those ways that you control that just a little bit in this lecture. Privacy, and we are going to be talking about California Privacy Act and the GDPR. That has become really at the forefront recently as far as what firms are responsible for when they send out that information to people, and that they have to understand that they've show that they've taken precautions, or else there can be some big repercussions on that. And then it's really important more than ever that data is inventory, and that you're aware as a firm who has what and where they have it. So just saying, I think I know which people have access to this data and which devices have it stored on there is not good enough, especially with the privacy regulation. It makes you responsible. It makes the firm responsible for wherever this information is being distributed and headed out the door. And that there has to be accountability for this information, as opposed to just saying, well, we don't know where all the places that this stuff can be. And there can be a lot of places where this stuff winds up. And then finally, maybe the biggest challenge of all on top of this is convenience. And we'll talk a little bit about how that is a dichotomy that creates many problems for law offices and businesses in general. Is you can have the safest system you want, but is it convenient enough for people to be able to use practically in the workforce? So we're going to talk a little bit about the new laws and changing requirements that are now out for laws that both change internationally and on a state level. And the first one is the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation. It was enacted by the European Union a few years ago. And it treats all instances of personal identifiable information as protected data that can't be leaked out and cannot be exposed, or there are penalties for it. That was followed up this last year by California Privacy Act, which is now being enforced, and other states have their own privacy acts as well. And these center also on like what the GDPR was working on, which is protecting private information from being exposed to outside parties, and giving the end user the control over their personally identifiable information. So if your law office is entrusting a lot of PII, as it's known, outside of the law office, whether it's European data or now California citizens data or any data, pretty much, you are going to be under the Privacy Act. If you have more than 50,000 names, you do more than $25 million worth of business, or you make more than 50% of your income off of the selling and monitoring of data. Those are things that can bring you under the Privacy Act. But if you're the subcontractor of a larger company or firm that is under the Privacy Act, you get roped into the Privacy Act or the GDPR as well, because the larger entities, if they subcontract with a smaller entity, are held to have to be responsible for the actions of the smaller entity if that entity has access to that data or control over the data that the larger entity is also in charge of. So in other words, it sort of is a trickle down, or maybe not so much a trickle down, but more like a tidal wave going downwards, where if the larger entity is told they have to be compliant along with all of its subcontractors, then the subcontractors usually get arm wrenched by the larger company to be compliant as well. And then we're seeing a lot of insurance companies sending out data and information questionnaires that are pretty complicated, pretty intense, in trying to get down to the bottom of exactly what measurements are being done to safeguard privacy and safeguard the efficacy, the information that's being stored on the computers, servers, and other peripherals that are hooked up to the data network and have access to this private information. So even if you're not held under the Privacy Act or the GDPR, there's still a good chance that if you can't show how you're managing the information that comes in, for the how you're managing the safety and security of the outside systems that are accessing your client's data and the data that's protected under the GDPR or Privacy Act, that your insurance would either be canceled or you would pay a much higher amount based on your inability to show the safety of that data. Probably most likely, the insurance company would just refuse to cover you, or you're not capable of getting cyber insurance until you can show that you have that stuff under control. And then we're also getting to a point where I think clients are beginning to expect to see how their data is being handled, and that it's mattering more to clients. They're being told that upfront how their data is going to be protected, and that if there are outside devices being brought into the company, how you can make sure that they're not going to possibly violate your privacy or get hacked or spill out information that should be protected. And then there's also a level now, I think, of employees expecting certain things too. In fact, a lot of employees kind of expect that they are going to use their own technology, not be issued the company laptop or the company cell phone, that they will just use their own technology when they're working, that they don't have to go and get used to something new or carry around two different cell phones and carry around, a laptop for themselves, get a laptop for their work. They don't want to have to do that. And they don't want to have to log in from a separate browser. They don't want to have to log in, with a completely separate ID. They want the convenience of being able to use one device all the time, not have to carry around a bunch of different things, coders and stuff like that. Now, not all of that is practical. Sometimes you have to issue a firm laptop or a firm cell phone because it is the only way you can guarantee control. But we're seeing more and more employees. It's sort of a dual thing. As more companies let employees use their own technology, employees sort of expect that they'll be using their own technology at work, except for, maybe a big mainframe or something too big for them to work with on their own house, on their own computer. But it used to be that the computers that you had at home were just not strong enough to do what you were doing at the office, and that the office computer was the only place that had something strong enough for you to be able to work and do the things that you need to do at work. But that has really changed a lot. And most people have computers at home that are powerful enough to do everything that they could do at work without any problems. And because that equivalency now exists, that people have their own copy of Word, they have their own copy of Excel, they have the internet connectivity that is broadband that's on 24 hours and high speed, that they don't necessarily need the technology at work anymore. And that wasn't always the case, but it's a relatively new development that we're in now, where that sort of thing isn't as big a deal, and that people have professional quality and professional level equipment at home as they would at work. And that's changed what employees now expect when they want to use their own technology and bring it into work. So I use this little picture here of what I call the New York City door lock, which is, you can see, I don't know if you've ever seen someone that had 8 or 9 different ways of locking their door, like in New York City. If they have an apartment in New York City, you have all these different deadbolts and sliding locks and chain locks and everything like that. Convenience and safety have to be balanced because, hey, if you look at this door system, it's probably one of the most secure doors that you can get, especially if it was like a steel door or something like that. Problem is, if you want to go out and get something from the hallway or go get your mail or something like that from the PO box, you have to undo every one of these locks so that you can get outside. And if you just need to go get something simple, you have to go through incredible rigmarole to open one of these doors. And then to lock it back up, you have to make sure every one of these locks is locked back up. That's not very convenient. And if something lacks convenience, you'll have one of two things. You'll have either people ignore locking it at all, which is certainly something that happens, or you'll have people doing it incorrectly, locking the wrong locks and leaving the ones that are the most secure locks unlocked because they're too confused with how many safety protocols there are versus something that is too simple and not strong enough to protect. You have to balance that out. You can't have something that is so inconvenient. We all realize how awful it is to take our shoes off when we go through a airplane flight these days. But there hasn't been a shoe bomber since the early 2000s. Someone tried to light a bomb off in their shoe in the early 2000s. So to sum it up, you're just going to have to realize that it's always going to be a cat and mouse kind of back and forth game between convenience and safety, whether you have something that is secure enough that gives you the assurance that you have what you need protected, but not so burdensome that you're not going to be able to use it when you really need it, or you get locked out too easily, or the combination is too difficult to find. I don't know if they say that you can have an 8 to 64 character password, but do you know anyone who has a 64 character password? My gosh, if you had to type in 64 characters that were all upper, lowercase, and asterisks and number signs. And I've also noticed there's a huge problem when people will write zeros or capital O's or ones or L's, or the letter I as capital I that looks just like the one. You can have a lot of those problems if you get a really, really complicated password. So you want to be able to manage both things at the same time, and be able to have both, monitor both at the same time. So we also run into one of the big issues, which is the dichotomy of saving data versus erasing it completely. On the one hand, the GDPR does make sure that you are able to completely delete something from when somebody requests, that you no longer have that information under your control. If someone says they don't want to participate, they don't want to be part of a mailing list or something like that, or your database, that you are able to delete them from your database. On the other hand, you're also being told that you have to be the safeguard of this data, and you can't just you have to secure it so that if people want to go back, look and see what records you have on them, that you don't say, I don't know where it is, or I didn't back it up, or it got deleted. So the general thought is, when you talk about computer data in general, the idea is to save that data and to not be able to get rid of it. But obviously, there's old machines and machines that are broken, that, let's say you have a broken laptop screen. Well, just because you can't see the data when you boot it up doesn't necessarily mean that your laptop doesn't still have that data on it. It still does. Or if you have a broken cell phone, a lot of people if their screen is broken, they just get a new cell phone, they throw the old cell phone in the trash. Well, that's not necessarily a great idea, because that cell phone still, even with a broken screen, has all that data on it. And there are SIM cards inside that phone that could be retrieved. There are SD cards that are in a lot of phones, removable, high density, thumb-sized data cards that are in there that can be also saving and backing up data. And then, of course, there's people who have Google accounts and cloud accounts, so that data is being saved. So just necessarily throwing the item in the trash doesn't mean you've deleted all the data and gotten rid of it. And steps have to be taken to make sure that that data is safeguarded and protected, and completely erased when you're done with it, but that you also have the accountability to find it when somebody needs it, and that you can recover it if you have a disaster or fire or a theft or something like that. The item is physically stolen, that's not the only copy of where you have that data, because if that is, and you lose that client data, you could have just as much liability for it as if it was, a piece of property that was stolen, a car that was stolen, or a wallet that was stolen, or something along those lines. So it's hard to come up with a perfect solution where you can erase everything completely, but also save it forever. And that will always be one of the big dichotomies, saving data. So with all these things sort of in the background, makes you kind of wonder, well, just exactly where should I start with something like this? And I think the very first thing, if you are going to have your firm allow law office technology to come in from outside the law office, is to do what I call a BYOT, or bring your own technology inventory. So you have to say who is going to be bringing what to the law office. What are they going to be bringing in? What's the status of that particular device, and what sort of control you'll have over it. So you need to know who is going to bring what to access the company's servers, and then what sort of access they need. Now, I've seen some companies, and some law firms, especially ones that weren't very sophisticated in how they approach this, to simply give administrative access to anyone that wants it and give access to every single file to anybody who, worked for the firm, including temp employees and so forth. And that's a real problem, because if you do give that sort of access to them, then you're going to be a little bit on the lack of control side with being able to, let's say they leave the firm or they feel disgruntled and want to cause problems. They have administrative access. They can cause a lot of problems. What is the status of these devices? So what levels of operating systems are accessing it, and what kind of security? In January of 2020, Microsoft announced that it was no longer maintaining the security patches for Windows 7. And yet there are still millions of people using Windows 7 at their homes and with their own technology. And if you are a firm that is got Windows 7, people who have Windows 7 still, and they're using that to access your system, then they are creating a huge patch, a huge hole that needs to be patched up, that otherwise could really compromise a system. And a lot of people go, well, Windows 7 seems to work fine for me. I've never had a problem. I haven't had a virus with it. But without security patches, you'll never know if you have a virus. You'll never know what sort of vulnerabilities you really do have on your system, because it won't alert you and won't warn you of it. It will just be compromised. And so it's also very important to know what the status is of your antivirus software and what your firewall status is. So many smartphones don't have any protection at all. And so people will use their smartphones that have employee accounts, or accounts that will access different levels of the database, and they'll use it at a public Wi-Fi spot without any sort of protection on it. And that's usually a formula for disaster and an easy way to get hacked. Many iPads are operated without passwords or password resets, or the ability to disable the iPad should it be lost or stolen. That's why a lot of people are being issued, as you can see on the lower right side of this picture here, an RSA secure ID key fob or card, like a credit card that they put in their wallet, that will every 10 minutes or so, or whatever time frame they determine, will have a different PIN number rotate through and change on a regular basis, so that you have to constantly, it'll log you out of the system after 20 minutes, 15 minutes, and then you'll have to re-log back in using this PIN number. And that can be pretty inconvenient, but it's certainly a lot more secure than no password at all. What we are seeing is that the localization of data through both good and bad reasons is going away, and you're not seeing anything. It used to be you had to go to the office to get access to your company's database or your firm's database, use the computer systems that had the programs on it you didn't have at home, and that you needed the internet that you didn't have at home, or good, reliable internet, to be able to do all your business stuff. But that's not the case anymore. There's no localization of data. So what you need is a clear policy that explains about how the data needs to be localized. And so you have to avoid personal email use and attachments when you're using a device that is being used at the firm. You have to put down some sort of policy so that people aren't using their personal emails intermixed and attaching things from the firm with their own personal email. I was working with one firm one time where they sent someone home and there were two different IDs, one for a personal one for the work ID. But the worker forgot the work ID password, didn't really think much about it. So they started using their own personal side of the login. And then they were using their own personal ID to email things back and forth. Well, when that firm was subpoenaed for a particular lawsuit that was filed against them, this person's personal email became discoverable because they had intermixed it so much with their work ID, with the stuff from their work. And the person was very displeased that we had to go through and copy their entire email database, including all their personal emails, because they had so much intermixed with their work email. And they had attachments and all this other stuff. And they talked about, they forwarded stuff from their business to their personal email and back and forth. There was no easy way to discern it. And the judge issued a ruling to have both the work and personal emails discoverable to the other side. There was nothing to be done about protecting those emails because of the interspersing that was done. And if the employee had followed the policy, which was to just use the work mail side, he would have protected his own personal email from being discovered. Social media is got to be something that is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. I put a question mark there because it's really not been determined as to what level at which your involvement in social media affects your ability to keep things private. But when people talk about certain things that should be at work kept privately, and they talk about it on social media, that usually will create some kind of a privacy violation. And so it's better to nip it in the bud and make sure that work and firm related matters are not talked about at all in social media, and that the employees agree contractually not to use social media to talk about things that are going on with the firm. And then you really got to make sure that that device is only being used by the individual employee and that they don't share the device with friends and family. Once those people just like the example I gave earlier, if you intersperse your work and personal email, and then you also have friends and family use that machine, their information could be discoverable as well if it gets intermixed with what's going on at the firm. A much better option is to use what's known as a web portal or a VPN, virtual private network. That's the best way to control access. So in other words, with a VPN, you are creating a tunnel that goes from your computer to the office, and then logs into an office machine using office equipment to access the office database, and everything is under office control. When you leave the VPN, the window closes up, or the web portal closes up, and you don't see and store anything on your machine locally based on what you were working with on the VPN. In the past, VPNs were pretty expensive to maintain, but that has changed a lot as technology has moved forward. Now you can have virtual private servers handle this sort of connection, VPN connection, where you don't have to maintain VPN at your office. So in other words, you go to a website, you click in on the website, that website then connects you to your machine at the office, and then it's as if you're sitting at your office machine. It can be as little as $40 a month. So you can also have your information hosted outside your office on a virtual private server, not even worry about how your office is handling that data. You give it to a private contractor. They, give you the assurances, and they sign something with you saying they'll protect your information, you've done your due diligence. As long as you're picking a server, a virtual private server that has a decent reputation, like a Microsoft Azure or Amazon Web Server Cloud Services, or OneDrive, something along those lines, and they'll handle your data for you and maintaining the server and all of that stuff. You don't have to worry about your connection at your office or anything along those lines. That's proving to be more and more popular as time moves on. And then we're also seeing cloud data servers of many varieties becoming even more prevalent. And a real important thing about the cloud data server is that no one particular physical server is got your data on it. So if there's a hurricane or an earthquake or a flood or a tornado that even devastates one particular state, you're not going to necessarily lose access to all your data because it's spread out over a number of different locations, which, yes, does create a security concern, but also does give you that belief that you're not dependent on just one server, physical server at your office. And when we had the fires in California a couple of years ago, there were a number of businesses that were completely shut out of being able to access their data, even though their data wasn't lost or stolen. It was on a hard drive that was in an office that was red flagged because it was in the middle of a fire zone, or there was too much fire and smoke in the vicinity for anyone to go in and use it. So by having data that was cloud-based, they were able to get around that and be able to access their data even when their physical servers were not available. So we've talked a little bit more about the major issues using the bring your own technology. And one of the simpler issues of the bring your own technology challenge is that you can have connection issues. By everyone having their own internet to connect to the office, well, you don't know how the internet's working outside of your own office. And it could be good, it could be bad, it could be fast, it could be slow, it could be interrupted. That's a problem and could remain a problem when you're working with outside the office technology. You're not sure if it's a secured connection. You don't know that the person that's using their iPad or their cell phone or even their laptop isn't on using it over at Starbucks, for instance, or at an airport, or over at an open, unsecured wireless hotspot anywhere across the various locations. You don't really know what the connection quality is going to be, and it could be inconsistent. It could be fast for a few minutes and then slow for a few minutes, then disconnected, then go back up. And it's hard sometimes to work on certain documents when the internet connection goes up and down like that, especially if it's not saving a localized version for you to work on when it's offline. A real big issue is that you have multiple operating systems when you have people bringing their own technology. So you have people with their Android phone, and you have people with their iOS, the phone, the operating system for their phones and their iPads. Well, I put BlackBerry down here. That's becoming less and less of an issue now, but there are still BlackBerries that float around every once in a while. People do have them that are active and have their own, which has their own operating system that's not the same as everybody else. And you have legacy data that's on BlackBerries, maybe from 10 years ago, but still could be relevant in lawsuits and other cases that you may have to retrieve from an old BlackBerry, which I've had to do from time to time. And it's getting harder and harder to do as those things become more and more obscure, and operating systems are less and less functional with the older BlackBerry system. So you do have data that's on an old BlackBerry. Probably now's the time to back it up and get it on another system so that you can read off of that versus having to hook up a BlackBerry and try to, load the old software and hope that it'll work on your operating system. Then, of course, there's the wonderful differences between the PC operating system and the Mac operating system. And that can create a lot of challenges all by itself. And yes, there's Linux. You know, it's maybe not the most popular system in the world, but it's in a surprising large number of places when you really add it all up. And especially because the Chromebooks work and the Androids are basically working off of a modified version of Linux. Linux is far from dead or as obscure as maybe people realize. And then, of course, there's always going to be new devices. And that's why I made it bold with an exclamation point, because you're never really sure what the future is going to provide as far as new communication devices go. So that's one that's a real challenge. And we're never going to really be able to say, even in this lecture, what a new device is going to create as far as a challenge goes. All I can say is that there will be new devices, and they will create new challenges. So implementing a bring your own technology program. If all of this hasn't scared you so much from wanting to do bring your own technology, and in the end, I think it's inevitable that bring your own technology happens at most law firms, at least in some degree, maybe not rolling out every single person, but certainly people who are mobile, people who are maybe temporary to the firm, or people who are associating with the firm, like let's say co-counsels that are working with other law offices but want to have access to the firm's data to work on a case. That's just going to become more or less the case, what's happening. Plus, in this today's coronavirus environment, more and more people are being told you got to work at home, which means that they're not necessarily bringing their own technology to the law office, but they are going to access the law office with their own technology. So better safe than sorry. So think of these as far as ways you can implement a bring your own technology program. First thing you want to do, and this is done not in enough cases, to survey the employee and then give them a chance to opt in or opt out, because no one wants to be told, oh, I was forced to use my home computer on this and then I had a problem, or I used up all my memory or my hard drive space and I blame you for it. They really don't want to opt in. They can opt out, and I'll still have to go use a firm-based laptop or firm-based computer at the law office itself. And that's okay. They just have to understand that their performance is going to be limited based on that, or perhaps certain job functions will be altered or changed based on the fact that they have to drive into the law office or come in physically to the law office to be able to use the technology. It's very important to find out who needs what access and to give the access to the database from home just that they need, instead of just saying, well, everybody gets to be an admin because it's too complicated to discern and to find which people should deserve what access. Find out who needs what access, give it to them, and give them only the access they need. If they're high sensitivity, great. But maybe if they're not, then don't give them high sensitivity. Now, find out what technology is currently out there. Find out what is being planned to use by a particular person. They may say, well, I'll just do everything with my tablet, but I don't know, if I need to print something, it's easier to use my laptop. So that you need to make sure that both the laptop and the iPad are working together, or the cell phone and the laptop and the iPad are all listed as items that they're going to use. Because even if they use something occasionally, all you need to do is have them use it once if it's not being protected correctly, and it can cause some significant liability. Support options. Now, you'd say, as we talked about, normally bring your own technology, they put the burden on the end user that's supplying the technology to handle technical problems and equipment problems and all that. But it would behoove most firms to supply some sort of support option, not just on how to access the system, how to get online, and how to get your database, but also if there are problems that they're experiencing, if they think that they have a virus, if they think that there is a problem with their firewall or that they're being hacked, how they can go about to fix that. Just putting your head in the sand and saying, well, that's the employee's fault, isn't going to cut it when the firm is likely being compromised. So the more you can provide support options available to the employees who are using their own technology to bring in, the better off you're going to be. You've got to make sure that you have good web access and portal functionality. So you need to test it under different conditions. You need to access it with a Mac. You need to access the web portal with a cell phone. You need to access a web portal with a PC. Maybe you have to access not only with a PC, but you have to use older versions of Chrome and or Firefox and or even maybe Internet Explorer to make sure that it works, because you never know what people are going to be using to access your network with. And if you have a wide-ranging bring your own technology program, likely, who knows, you might have the occasional Commodore 64 user trying to hook up to your internet, or someone, trying the old black and white Mac to hook up there. So you need to also make sure that you are issuing requirements and telling people, if you have a really, really old system, as we talked about with Windows 7, you don't want them to even try to access your system. Then usage policies, who pays for what? So should the employee be on the hook for all the data charges and for access to the company's files, or is the company going to take care if they know the person is using a cell phone? Will they pay for the data charges and the access fees that it costs to make that possible? Will they let you pay for your own hotspot when you're using your own internet, your phone as a hotspot, get your laptop online? Will they pay for VPN access so that you could use a Starbucks, but you'd use your own VPN connection once you got on to a public Wi-Fi system? So it's great to spell that out and make sure that if you're implementing a program, who exactly is responsible for paying the access and who is responsible for paying for any charges or data usage that occurs while accessing the company's firm's database. Make sure everyone reads and acknowledges the policies. You'd think that goes without saying, but it's still very important. You want to make sure that everyone dots the I's and crosses the T's, and that they have promised that they will uphold these policies, so that you have a contractual level of compliance as well as a technical level of compliance. And if the company is big, probably works to do a pilot program with the Bring Your Own Technology. Give it to a few individuals. See how it works out, especially people that are in, that must work from outside, that must have the outside access to their own technology to the law office. For instance, secretaries that do have their desktops at work and they don't work after hours, probably not as important to do as like the attorneys that are at trial a lot and are at the courthouse, need to be able to access the database and to give frequent updates as to what's going on in the field back to the law office, so the law office can react. So it depends on the size of your firm and how many essential versus non-essential versus active versus inactive employees are going to be working with this system, and then try to roll it out to the ones that are the biggest users of it versus the ones that would only be casual ones. So, continuing on implementing a BYOT program, here's a bunch of different resources that will help you get started. Probably the number one creator of bringing your own device through a VPN would be the folks at Citrix. They really create the VPN backbone that a lot of companies use to create outside access to inside data on servers. And it's the only problem with Citrix is it can be pretty complicated to use, not as easy to set up. So then there's a lot of different virtual server hosts. As you can see, there's HostGator, Amazon, and Rackspace, and GoDaddy. They can all host your own virtual machine, and then you can log into it and use it from there. They're usually pretty competitive price-wise, and so they're all trying to undercut the other one as far as their market dominance goes. So they're trying to have price wars and make people make their competitions lower their price, but the companies themselves tout their value of how they provide this information. You notice they're all pretty big companies that are part of the virtual server host crowd. So you probably have seen them, and they're the ones that provide a lot of email support, setting up servers, that sort of thing. Kind of a related field. Have a email server and have a virtual server as well. Then there's server security that you need to be concerned about. So I've listed Barracuda and McAfee and Norton, but there's plenty of others like ESET and Kaspersky. And I'm not trying to endorse any particular one of that you need for your your server security, but it is good to know that there are these different companies available. It's really, you have to go with sort of your gut feeling as to what you think has kept you safest the longest, and probably go with that one. I mean, I know about Barracuda Networks, which a lot of people have talked about and used. I have been using personally Norton to protect my system, but there's McAfee has its level system, and pretty much anyone that is a professional based networking security provider is going to be able to say that they've got a good enough network for you. It's just a matter of end users being able to configure it up correctly, and then to run the testing and to know what to do when they find a bad result from the test. And then I listed 2 web pages here for getting the RSA Secure ID token. And here's another example of key fob token that we used. It allows you to put it on your keychain, and again, it just generates a random code every few minutes. You can see that one says 159, then 759. It's pretty hard for people to break in when you've got something so personally attached to you, and you can hold just real quickly and get up the the PIN number that you need, the secure ID PIN number, almost instantly. It's a pretty effective way of what they call the 2-step ID. So here's a quick bibliography of the things that I use to help write this talk. And it's important just to know there's a lot of data out there for bringing your own technology, a lot of resources that you can go to, including the State Bar Law Practice Management Technology section, and the American, the ABA, the American Bar Association, the American Lawyers Association, all have talks about how you can bring your own technology, what they suggest for technology, and how you can make it work to your own advantage, make maybe even a more efficient law firm by using some of the plans and tricks that they talk about in these articles. So that is my presentation. And if you have any other questions or needs, you can contact me here over at the Center for Continuingly Good Education. Really appreciate your time and attention today, and looking forward to my next presentation. Thank you very much.